The cosmic machine. Since time immemorial, the sacred traditions of humanity have built pyramid-shaped cosmic machines in order to receive and transmute powerful energies from the cosmos for the benefit of their cultures and according to the designs of the architect of the universe and to the cosmic responsibility that the elders from each tradition interpreted they had to play. Such had undoubtedly been the case of the pyramids of the sun and the moon in the sacred city of Teotihuacan. Its former rulers and its spiritual elite, represented by authentic warriors whose conscience was able to function permanently in the sacred dimension of existence, were awakened beings capable, with the enormous potential of their personal vibration, to materially and spiritually ignite the cosmic machine, which they accessed in days of spiritual opportunity simply by making an appearance in those sacred precincts. Teotihuacan. In the sacred city of Teotihuacan, one more ceremonial walk was to take place on the occasion of the autumn equinox, part of the Naiwiolin, and a day of an enormous spiritual opportunity. The ancient Mexicans knew perfectly well that the spirit of Quetzalcoatl descended on that date, bringing with it to our sacred territory energies of enormous power and of a very high vibration for the benefit of all its inhabitants. Such was precisely the reason for the walk that day, which should end at the top of the Pyramid of the Sun at 10 in the morning. Our newly formed group Don Uriel was to join other walkers to settle for a larger contingent and with whom we would meet in the sacred city where men become gods. Our contingent of walkers, aspiring warriors, and spiritual warriors would try to establish the necessary harmony with the Pyramid of the Sun, which, thanks to the recent work of a group of Tibetan spiritual warriors sent by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, had been activated, and it was now able to distribute to a certain extent to all those who knew how to contact it with respect, honesty, and purity, the most powerful energy from the cosmos that the pyramid was designed to transmute and redistribute for the benefit of individuals and for all the nadis and energy centers of the enormous Mexican chakra. When our small group arrived at the entrance of the holy city, a large and enthusiastic contingent of men and women, all in their white robes and red headbands, were already waiting for us, ready to start one more ceremonial walk. After the necessary dedication of our work and the request for group help and protection to our Creator, we would have to meet in two different contingents, one male and the other female. Once the two groups of walkers were established, the column of men would walk on the right side and around the enormous archaeological zone that made up the sacred city of Teotihuacan, following the peripheral path that surrounds it on the outside, while the column of women would do the same by going around the outside on the left. After the prayers of rigor and offering of our ceremonial work for the awakening of our nation, an enormous effluvium of energy that I can only describe as a greater freshness ran through our entire circle at an enormous speed, constituting, without a doubt, the signal that our work was accepted and that we were authorized to proceed. The secret garden of the holy city watched us pleased, in search of internal silence. For the achievement of the internal silence that was fundamental in our walk, explained a woman with a radiant gaze that would lead the female contingent, just when the two contingents who would shortly go out to make this walk reached half their route, both columns would necessarily cross at some point along the way, and when this happened, it was essential that both contingents had already reached the necessary internal silence and created a minimum of the positive vacuum necessary to thereby, at least momentarily, fuse and exchange the different energies that each column carried. Men would naturally transmute through the force of their internal silence the feminine energy received when crossing the column of women, and the same would happen with the feminine column when crossing necessarily and receiving the effluvium of masculine energy from the masculine contingent. Such an exchange would help walkers adequately work out their male counterparts for women and female counterparts for men. If such an exchange was carried out with a minimum of effectiveness, concluded the aspiring spiritual warrior, the walk and subsequent ritual ascension to the Pyramid of the Sun in the city of Teotihuacan would have good chances of success, because when returning from the enormous journey that would take us to go around the archaeological zone of Teotihuacan, the two columns of walkers would be perfectly balanced in terms of energy and would have the minimum necessary internal silence to try to generate pyramidal energy. She explained that when two different polarities run parallel but isolated, in this case by a vacuum produced by their internal silence, their proper contact with a generator of pyramidal energy or cosmic machine always produced the uninterrupted flow of the inexhaustible and powerful celestial energy in the same extent that its conductor was able to conduce and transmute it. It was probably 8 o'clock in the morning and in that September 22nd when both columns left the Teotihuacan parking area and each headed their own route looking for the path that borders the huge archaeological zone, one on the left and the other on the right. Despite the early hour, it was beginning to feel a little hot on the environment. After about 20 minutes walking south, and just as we turned to the left, heading east and parallel to one side of the sacred city of Teotihuacan, a providential wind began to blow for a few minutes, refreshing our entire contingent. My mind was more active than usual because the ceremonial walk was for me an experience that I was enjoying immensely. To appease my thoughts, I began to pray. The sacred couple. This was a particularly misty morning, which increased the ambient temperature that began to weigh on all of us in the form of an unpleasant, dry, and oppressive heat. As I achieved a more silent state of consciousness, not without great difficulties, thanks to my rhythmic and recurrent prayers, I began to turn from time to time to my right and in the direction where I knew the millennial couple of sacred volcanoes were, which were impossible to see in that misty and polluted morning. Little by little, and inexplicably, when I turned in the direction of Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, my field of vision seemed to clear up a little in that direction. At first, I dismissed that perception as illusory on my part, but when I turned again, I noticed that my field of vision in that direction was a clean picture compared to the environment around it. Although I knew I should walk with my eyes straight ahead, I couldn't resist turning from time to time in that direction. I increased my prayers with all fervor, considering that they would serve as protection against my illusory perceptions, perhaps product of my undisciplined and fanciful mind. But to my utter surprise, when I turned to my right again, I perceived the image of both volcanoes completely clear and for a brief seconds. Even fighting against my perceptions and in the absurdity of disbelief, I considered imagining everything that was happening to me in my eagerness to see the holy couple that day. I resolved then to fix my eyes on the front, and so I continued for at least 20 minutes, increasing my prayers at the same time and asking the Virgin of Guadalupe for protection against my distractions that surely, and in my personal opinion, did not help at all in those moments to the necessary cohesion and internal silence that as a group we had to reach as soon as possible. Once I had calmed down, knowing that I had simply fantasized my perceptions and verifying that with my eyes the mysticness of that day, I looked without any concern again, now to my right and towards the volcanoes. My surprise was capital when I saw them clearly and in their most absolute majesty. Not only did I see them, but I felt them in the form of a very powerful emanation of energy that almost knocked me down and took me out of formation in the column of walkers. Something totally strange but positive at the same time happened as soon as I managed to recover after stumbling for a few moments and still in formation within the column of walkers. I stopped fighting before my mental reasoning that told me that this was not real, because even from the angle in which I was walking, it was impossible to have a straight line view of Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, even on a day with kilometers and kilometers of clarity and without any contamination. The powerful impact of the energy emanating from the oldest couple in our nation made it clear to me that I had established contact with them from my heart, and helped by my fervent prayers surely heard by the Guadalupana. In my own spiritual smallness, the perception of the impact, a very powerful energy, was the imperfect way in which I perceived them. But the contact filled me with joy. We should already be reaching the middle of the long circuit that surrounds the sacred city of Teotihuacan. Our rhythm of walking was already quite cohesive and regular at that time, and our column was already walking as a single being. Due to the shading and of the surroundings, I noticed a kind of light that was barely perceptible in front and to the left of where we were walking. But you had to look at it, at that area, just out of the corner of your eye to perceive it. Because when I looked at that particular point on the horizon, it was not possible for me to perceive nothing. 15 minutes later, that spot of light and clarity in our misty, shady surroundings had grown a little larger. To my total surprise, and precisely in the area of the left and in front of our column where I could see the dim light point, it already appeared with some clarity, and at a distance in my field of vision, the feminine column that advanced in total concentration and as a single being towards us. That dim light that I had been appreciating for several minutes was nothing less than the spiritual energy that was projected by the column of warriors as I walked. A few minutes later, and when I recovered from the sensation of discovery, both columns crossed, and again for the brief moments in which both contingents walked parallel in different directions, I appreciated with all certainty that the area in which we were walking acquired more luminosity, as if it were no clouds or mist that darkened the surroundings a bit. This phenomenon disappeared immediately once the two columns began to separate towards their own destiny. The rest of the circuit paced without eventuality and with a cohesive and silent contingent. Ritual ascent. Something important happened during the crossing of the male and female columns in the middle of our journey, and this surely had to do with the rhythm that our guide was now giving to his walk in front of our column. Perhaps the exchange between the characteristic energies of both columns contributed to this synchronization of our walk, which was fluid and lilting at the time. Something was also different in our march, since it seemed that now we advanced without difficulty and almost without any effort. It was as if the circuit through which we were now traveling had been cleaned and its characteristic energy turned on, so to speak, by the action of the female column that had preceded us in the opposite direction. When almost an hour and a half after the start we arrived at our starting point and entered the parking area and later the central corridor that leads to the Pyramid of the Sun, it did not surprise me at all at this point on our incredible journey to coincide with opposition with the female column, which made its appearance in total synchronization, walking in parallel and disciplined way next to our column. A new internal perception surprised me again, because when I saw the female column again, I heard an internal voice that said, "We are already here," as if the actions of both columns were made up of a single being, and at that time there was no fragmentation. This perception of cohesion and unity and perception of the female column as part of ours remained with me throughout the ascent to the cosmic machine that we know as the Pyramid of the Sun. There was no doubt in my heart. We had achieved it. We had entered to the sacred dimension of existence, arriving as a single being in respect and neatness to the city where men become gods. After a few minutes, at the sounding of seashells, we began the ritual ascent to the Pyramid of the Sun. And after each stage of ascension that corresponded to the various sections of the pyramid, the seashells were sounded in all four directions, and each column advanced along its characteristic route. Little by little, with respect and neatness, we carried out the group ascension in that incredible cosmic machine. There was something indefinable in the environment, a powerful and subjugating energy. Each stone was oozing sacredness. Arriving at the top of the Pyramid of the Sun after 2 hours of ceremonial walk, I remember my ascents to various mountains and the feeling of enormous satisfaction when I first stepped on their summit. There was satisfaction and faces transformed everywhere. Our guide and the radiant-faced women immediately began the formation of a ritual circle to balance and harness the energy of our group. Once together, in energetic balance and holding hands, we all understood immediately, even without saying a single word, that it was necessary to pronounce the sacred mantra of our noble nation to finish our ceremonial work that day. Immediately, as the pronunciation of the sacred mantra grew and vibrated everywhere, I felt a whirlwind of energy go through my body from head to toe, and when I opened my eyes, I could only perceive a very white light like I had never witnessed before. Little by little, the whiteness faded to show the satisfied and excited faces of my aspiring spiritual warrior brothers and sisters. At that same moment, the wind returned with enormous momentum as if wanting to acknowledge our noble effort. It was over. Male warriors and female warriors merged everywhere in fraternal embraces. I looked for Paloma and our little warriors, and when we melted into a brotherly and loving embrace, I felt that Don Uriel was smiling with pleasure. Our humble group had done their first job.